So the first thing you have to understand is that for a constant in Rust, you must provide the type, while for an ordinary variable, you don't need to provide the type. So, for example, let's say we have a constant here, okay, and you start defining a constant with the word const, and then you give it a value, let's say days of the week, and then we set it to 7. There are 7 days in a week. The first thing you have to notice here is that Rust will start warning us. It says provide type for the constant. So whenever you define a constant in Rust, you must provide the type. So let's give it a type. Let's say I32. And that error is gone. And then we can now print that to the terminal. Okay, and if we run that code, we get days equal to 7. However, if this were to be an ordinary variable, let's say we call it days, and then we set it to 7, you can see that there won't be any problem here. In fact, we can also print this into the console in the terminal by saying days, a small letter, equal to, and then we'll provide that days here. If we run that code again, you see that we got days equal to 7 without any errors. So what Rust did here is that it automatically assigned I32 to this variable for us. It will do it for us, but if we went for const, okay, if you define the constant, we must specify the type beforehand. So that is the first difference between a variable and then a constant. The second thing you need to know about the second difference between a variable and a constant is that a constant is always a constant. It's always immutable. What it means is that once you define a constant, you can never change it. There's no constant that you can ever be able to change. For example, days of the week is now 7. There's no way you can change it at all. However, for a variable, we can make these days changeable by just attaching this mute keyword to it. So once we've done this, it means that days can change later on. So we can come down here and then say days equal to 8. And then when we run this code, you get days equal to 8, which means right here we have modified what was inside days over here. However, with a constant, you can never change that value. So it's not just immutable, it is always immutable. However, a variable can be mutable or immutable. Now the third thing you need to understand here is that for a constant, you can define a constant in any scope. So for example, here we are inside main, this function called main. Let's say we have another function here that we'll call let's say we have another function here that we'll call another. Okay, and then inside here we want to use this value called days of the week over here. We want to just print it to the print it to the terminal. Then we can say days from another equal to. Now we want to use days of the week, but we can't do this here. In order to make this all easy for us, we can move this out of this function and place it outside here. This way we can easily access it from anywhere, from here and from here. However, we can't do that with a variable. For example, if we move this variable from here to the global scope right here, it's already highlighting it, which means you can't do this. You can't use a variable in a global scope, while you can do that with const. That is the third difference between a constant and a variable. Now the next thing you have to understand here for a constant is that another difference between a constant and a variable is that a constant will only be set to a constant value. So what it means is over here, when we created days of the week, we can assign 7 to it. However, we cannot assign a calculated value to it. Let me give you an example. Let's say we come over here and then we created days of the week, and then we want to assign 6 plus 1 to it. Okay, it's going to allow it because it's constant. Let's delete this function. It's going to allow this because they are still constant values. However, if they were calculated values, like we are reading it from another variable, it's not going to allow it. Let's say we created a variable here, and let's say we call it b of type i32, and then we set it to, let's say, 4. Okay, and then we want to say days of the week is equal to 2 plus b. You see, it's going to highlight this for us, and it will complain and say, consider using let instead of const. And it says, attempt to use a non-const value in a constant non-constant value. What it means is that you can't use a calculated value or assign a variable to a constant. You must assign a constant value. Okay, something like this, or just a single value to it. However, for a variable, we can assign a calculated value to it. Let's say we have another value here that we call b, and then we assign 8 to it. If you come over here, we can assign this b. Let's say you call it 7. We assign 7 to it. We can move whatever we have inside here to days with RECs, simply because it's a variable. But for a constant, we can't do that. Now, the next difference is the naming convention. So as you can see, whenever we create a constant, we will give it a name. And the name has to be, for conventional sake, has to be all capital letters. And then for each word, you separate it with an underscore, like a snake case, but all capital letters. However, for a variable, the convention for naming the variable will be all snake cases, small letters. So if this was to be a variable, we can say days of the week, all small letters, and then all the words will be separated by underscores, and then we can assign it to whatever we want to assign it over here. Now let's talk about memories. One of the biggest difference between a constant and a variable is that constants are not stored in memories in Rust. They are stored inline in the code wherever they are once they compile. And this is a very huge benefit in Rust, okay, as it makes the code very, very efficient. So for example, now we've created days of the week over here, and then we've created days of the week here as well. When this code runs, okay, after compiling this code, you find out that days of the week will not be stored in the memory when the code is executing. However, this will be stored in the memory. But since it is of type i32, so the type is known, it will be stored in the stack. Okay. However, if it was a string, since the type would not be known at compile time, it will be stored in the heap. So one of the biggest difference, so the difference here is that a constant is stored inline, okay, in the code. However, a variable is stored in memory at execution time, either in the stack or in the heap, depending on the type of variable it is.